right, we are wrapping up chapter 13, talking about our motor responses. So, this is what happens after we pick up the sensory information and integrate it. What happens next? So, we have some different types of responses. First is cortical responses. So, these are going to be in some part of the cortex. So our prefrontal cortex is found within the frontal lobe, and this is really important for executive functions, which include things like working memory, our attention, and personality. So this part of the brain actually does not elicit any sort of movement at all. And so while it doesn't cause any movement, this is still really, really important. So working memory is going to help organize and retrieve information that's not found in our immediate environment, so coming from our memory and stuff like that. And this is going to help us be able to plan and prioritize different tasks and stuff like that. And then the attention, again, so regulating attention. So this isn't necessarily going to be lack of, but regulation of that attention is found here. So being able to kind of tune out various distracting information and stuff like that, distracting thoughts, sounds, actions, and things, so that you can focus on a specific goal and direct your behavior appropriately to achieve that goal. All right. And then personality, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And so just a slight tie-in to more of a real-world scenario here really quickly. The prefrontal cortex is one of the main areas of the brain that develops very differently than what's considered normal in ADHD, so that is attention deficit and or hyperactivity disorder. ADD now falls under the ADHD diagnosis now. It's now, ADD is now considered to be the inattentive form of ADHD. So there are some different subtypes of ADHD instead of ADHD and ADD, because they were originally thought to be different conditions. Turns out they're one and the same with different symptom presentations, but it's the same genetic mutations and same differences in brain development that are causing these different symptoms for various people. So prefrontal cortex is impacted in ADHD, which means that working memory and attention are greatly impacted. And so again, working memory helps with organizing and pulling relevant information that is not in your immediate environment. So remembering, where did I put this object down that I need to finish this task? So where did I put these scissors down because I need to finish opening this package to get, this textbook or whatever it is. So that working memory helping with whatever you're doing right now, and then planning and prioritizing is impaired for people who have ADHD. And then that attention regulation again. So the name ADHD, attention deficit, is not accurate. And that has led to a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes about ADHD, but ADHD is not a lack of attention. It is a difficulty with regulating it in a way that helps people with ADHD achieve their goals, despite their best intentions. So the brain does not regulate that attention properly. There are some effective treatments in various forms, both therapy, so talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and then also some different medications, both stimulant and non-stimulant, that can help with this, but it is not a magical fix for those. All right, but that is kind of one of our real world connections there. There's some other areas of the brain that are impacted with ADHD. Prefrontal cortex also plays a role in things like autism as well, and other neurodevelopmental disorders like dyslexia and stuff like that. So there's a lot of areas of the brain that can be really impacted by various genetic mutations. All right, so getting into our other cortices, our secondary motor cortices, these are all of the other regions of the frontal lobe. So the prefrontal lobe is its own thing, and then everything else is the secondary motor cortices. And these are going to elicit or produce movements. So we have a premotor cortex. This is helping us maintain our posture during movements. So being able to stay fully upright while walking or running. The supplemental motor area, this helps to plan and coordinate movement. So if you have to reach up onto a shelf to get a cup, then the supplemental motor area is helping with that process. So you need to be able to reach, move your muscles in a certain way and have them coordinate so that you're not knocking things over and stuff like that. We have the frontal eye fields, so this helps control movement of the eyes. And then Broca's area, which we talked about a little bit before, that helps with speech production, which involves muscles. And then we have the primary motor cortex, which is located within that pre-central gyrus. So pre-central gyrus of the frontal lobe. The post-central was for integration. So the pre-central gyrus of the frontal lobe is our primary motor cortex. So we also have a motor homunculus as our topographical map, and so its principal output, so its job is to stimulate spinal cord neurons for skeletal muscle contraction, so just general movement, so moving your arms and legs and body and stuff. So then we have our descending pathways, so this is where we're going to start seeing those efferent motor neurons coming out, efferent receptors and stuff. So this is the pathways going down the brainstem, through the spinal cord, and then out through the spinal nerves to our different skeletal muscles. So we have two of these pathways, the corticospinal tract and the corticobulbar tract. So the corticobulbar tract is ipsilateral. So axons coming from the right side of the cortex control the right side of the body. The ones coming from the left side of the cortex go to the left side of the body. So this is mostly movements of the muscles in the face, head, and neck. And then the corticospinal tract is going to be mostly contralateral. So we have that cross of the axons at the midline of the brainstem or spinal cord, going to the opposite side of the body than where they're coming from the brain. And this is going to control movements of the muscles of the limbs and trunk, so everything from the neck down. So that corticospinal tract comes from the cerebral cortex through the deep white matter of the cerebrum, passes through the caudate nucleus and putamen of the basal nuclei as a bundle called the internal capsule, which then passes through the midbrain and then going through the pons, and then the medulla, and then we have the tracts making up the large white matter tracts referred to as pyramids. And then our defining landmark going from the medulla to the spine is the pyramidal or pyramidal descutation. This is where most of the fibers coming from the corticospinal tract are crossing over to the opposite side of the brain or body. So this is mostly where that cross happens that causes the corticospinal tract to be that contralateral innervation, right? So this corticospinal tract has appendicular and axial control. So again, appendicular is arms and legs, axial body is the torso. So the appendicular control is mostly under the lateral corticospinal tract. So these cross the midline. And then the axons are going to come from anterior position of the pyramids and the medulla into the lateral column of the spinal cord. The anterior corticospinal tract is responsible for controlling muscles in the body trunk. So the all of the oblique muscles and stuff like that, everything in your back. So these don't actually come out of the medulla. They actually stay in the anterior position as they descend into the brainstem and spinal cord. And so once they get into the spinal cord, they're going to synapse with a lower motor neuron. And when they get to the appropriate level of the spinal cord, they are going to leave through the ventral horn on the opposite side of the spinal cord from where they entered. So here is our figure. So here is our precentral gyrus. There's our cerebral cortex. So here we have all those neurons coming down through the midbrain, so that brainstem into the spinal cord, right? So this is still brainstem right here. And here's that crossover. All right, so this is happening mostly within the brainstem, is that crossover from one side of the brain to the opposite side of the spinal cord and skeletal muscles in the body. Here's a map of our ascending and descending tracts so that you can kind of see what we're looking at here with that spinal cord. So this is a cross section of the spinal cord. So our motor and descending or efferent pathways are in red, right? So sacral, lumbar, thoracic, and cervical neurons coming through there. We also have a few back here. So this would be that anterior median fissure right here. So we have a few of these on the anterior side of the body. This is going to be true on the opposite side, right and left of those lateral sides. And then our sensory and ascending or afferent pathways are in blue here. So again, we can see coming up through this dorsal column, sacral, lumbar, thoracic, and cervical information, as well as some information coming up here in that lateral column. So this is all pulling that various information to and from the actual brain. All right, so we've talked a lot so far about how things get sent to the brain, they get processed, and then we send a signal back down to the body to produce some sort of action. But again, this somatic system is all under conscious control. And this is going to include things like reflexes, so somatic reflexes. And these are actions of our skeletal muscles that are going to happen usually before we have a chance to really consciously think about what we're doing, but these are still part of the somatic system. So the withdrawal reflex is going to have a nerve impulse from some sort of stimuli in the skin of, say, the fingers. Spinal cord gets that sensory information from the body and goes through an interneuron, and then it will send a response back out through the spinal nerves. There is going to be information going up to the brain still of what just happened, but these somatic reflexes are going into the spinal cord, and the spinal cord is processing that and sending a signal back out. So the withdrawal reflex, for example, say you put your hand on a hot stove accidentally or pick up a hot pan or something, you are going to drop it or remove your hand pretty much before you really realize what happens, right? That pain doesn't usually register until you've already moved your hand away from that hot surface. And it is because that stimuli, that pain, is going into the spinal cord. The spinal cord is recognizing that as dangerous amount of pain, processing through that interneuron and sending those impulses back out, telling your muscle, pull that away, move, don't do that anymore, right? And then that information does still make it up to the brain to register that as a pain sensation. You just grabbed something hot, but that reflex, that initial reflex, is happening very often before or as you are really realizing what just occurred, right? We also have stretch reflexes. This is when a skeletal muscle gets stretched. There's a spindle fiber receptor that gets activated, and the axon from that receptor will cause direct contraction of that muscle. All right, so this is your muscles trying to keep themselves from being stretched too far, to that extreme, which could cause damage to that particular muscle. All right. So a good example of this reflex is the knee jerk. So most of us probably haven't had this happen since we were kids, but those little rubber hammers that doctors use, they'll tap on the patellar ligament in the knee during a physical exam, and you should reflexively, the lower leg should kick out when that happens. Even though you didn't really think in your brain, oh, I need to move my leg. It's a reflex. It's happening very, very quickly. All right? Not necessarily automatically, because we are having this process. It is going into the central nervous system, but it's going to the spinal cord. All right? So here's that withdrawal reflex arc. So you touch a hot surface, some source of heat, that gets sent to the spinal cord, gets processed with the interneurons, and then we send a response directly from the spinal cord to move your hand away. Contract those muscles to move your hand. Here's that stretch reflex. So we have that hammer hitting that patellar ligament. This is a little bit more involved, obviously. So we see that extensor muscle get stretched from that hammer hitting it. All right. Muscle spindle gets stimulated. So that neuron, that's going to go ahead and send that afferent signal to the spinal cord into that afferent tract. Some of that information, again, will go to the brain, but some of it gets processed right there in the spinal column, and we send a response forcing that leg, the lower leg, to kick forward. That wraps up chapter 13, and we will continue in the next video with chapter 14.